Hi, everybody. So today on this video, what I want to discuss is uh, the difference between an employee and a contractor. Um, if you are ever starting a small business, currently have a small business, you may wonder, why can't I just pay people by a 1099, as a contractor rather than have to put them on payroll? Um, and the IRS has some guidelines around this, and I want to share kind of how I would look at it if I were you, okay, based on what the IRS says. Um, because I know that there was some guidance that was coming out from the Bureau of Labor at one point in time. I don't know that that ever actually passed or was put into effect. But the IRS does have certain expectations around how you pay people. Okay. So I'm going to give you some examples. I'll also link some articles from the IRS as far as this guidance is concerned. And so as you read it, kind of keep these things in mind. Okay. So one of the things that the IRS looks at when you think about, should I pay them on a payroll or should I pay somebody by a 1099? They look at, number one, this category called behavior. Okay. And essentially what that means is, do you as an employer have uh, full influence on how this job is done? Okay. So, for instance, if you hire a lawyer and you're not a legal firm, yeah, so let's say you have a coffee shop or you have uh, your landscape construction person, or whatever, and you hire some legal counsel to do something. The How they do their job is not your purview. You don't provide instruction on how they do their work, right? Because you have no expertise in that, right? But if you're a coffee shop and you are hiring baristas, you are likely training them on exactly how you want the job done. So, thinking of that in mind, you would not pay a barista as a 1099 employee. You would put them on a payroll. Okay. So, you think about this behavior perspective. The second thing you want to look at is financially. How are these people paid? How are they reimbursed for expenses? That type of thing, right? um, and so, who um, provides the tools and supplies, and that's an interesting one. And also, from a financial perspective, you've got to look at too, do these people offer their services to other companies? And that's often the differentiator when it comes to financial. Okay. So, for example, I run a bookkeeping business. I offer these services to multiple companies, uh, different industries, etc. And so when I'm hired by a company to do bookkeeping, that bookkeeping service is definitely 1099 oriented. Okay. Uh, Somebody would typically not put me on payroll, um, because how I do bookkeeping, while a small business owner, thinking back to that behavior perspective, right? They might have some input on how they want things done. Financial reporting, financial analysis is what it is. And, so we do things based on our expertise that a lot of times a small business owner would not have that background or that expertise. Okay. Um, so plus we have our own expenses. We don't get reimbursed by a client for our expenses unless, of course, we're fronting, something that needs to be paid by the client, like for instance, I have paid renewal fees, but I get reimbursed for that from the client because it's actually something they should pay. That sort of thing, right? And we're clear about that in our agreements, etc. That we can do reimbursable type expenses, that sort of thing. So when you're thinking from a financial perspective, probably the biggest key is, would this individual offer these services to other companies, right? So if you're hiring a legal firm, yeah, they offer these services to other people, right? You have no control over how they do their job. You have, right? You don't, they offer these services in the marketplace, in other words, right? But if you're hiring a barista, you're hiring them to specifically do a job that you control. You are the one that is reimbursing them for clothing costs if you do such a thing, if you have policies around that, etc. So that's kind of what we're thinking of here. And then lastly, uh, the relationship that, um, think of this as the relationship of that person to your business. So in other words, this is how to think about that. Do you reimburse your employees, right? You probably would not reimburse a contractor for driving to the office or driving in some way like that. You probably wouldn't do that. Another thing, you might reimburse someone for clothing, like I said, because they have a specific uniform that they have to wear or something. I know in some of the businesses we support, they have uniforms, right, that are purchased, and, they pay for that themselves for the employees, a lot of times, so, in that way, you're an employee, okay, when you work for that company. Now, another way to look at this is the person doing work that is core to the business, okay? And so that's another reason I am often differentiated, working for a client, is that, I'm doing bookkeeping. I'm doing administrative work, okay, for a client. So for instance, if I have a client that's in um, financial services, if I am working for a client that um, does travel, if I'm working for a client that does construction of any kind, electrical services, blah, 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 I'm not doing any of those core functions. I'm not advising clients on financial matters. I'm not, from an investment perspective and things like that, I'm not doing construction. I'm not doing the electrical work. I'm not doing the travel. Okay. I'm doing a support function, right? Um, and so if a person is working in your business and they're actually doing the core work, meaning that the work they're doing is actually generating revenue for you, then you have to put them on a payroll. The IRS will not see that any other way. Okay. So for instance, if I hire a bookkeeper, okay, that's core to my business because we provide bookkeeping services for clients. Okay. So, now I might on a trial basis hire someone as a 1099, only on a trial basis. But that's for a short period of time, and it's to make sure that they are comfortable um, in our system, working with multiple clients, because that's a different skill set, right? But then I immediately put them onto a payroll once they're permanent, full-time or permanent part-time, whatever they are. And so essentially, you've got to think about, if I'm hiring a barista and I am a coffee shop, that is core to my business. That is what drives revenue for me. And so they should be on a payroll, okay? Because the IRS is not going to look at it any differently. So if you're ever audited, these are the things that the IRS is looking at to ensure that they get their rightful taxes, you know, FICA, income tax, all that stuff, right? So anyway, I hope this is helpful. And if at any point you think you need some bookkeeping support, certainly think of corebridge.com. That is COEUR bridge.com. Thank you so much.